Welcome back everybody, it's great to be back with you. In our first video we had a look at how do we make a persuasive sales presentation, and we focused on how we need to be outcome driven, very clear about what the point is, what the message is for the audience, what the action is we want them to take and the benefit to them. And we also explored the idea of supporting the argument with substantiated proof. And so what we're looking at this time is the second major subject that I get asked about. It's a question that comes up enormously frequently, which is how do I make my boring presentation sexy? And the question that will come up so often in workshops is, I'm talking about accounting or governance or compliance or IT, finance, all these subjects that seem on the outside to be intrinsically boring. And the question is, how do I engage my audience and how do I make it interesting? And I'm going to pose a thought to you or put an idea to you that may be confronting, but I'm actually going to suggest that there are no inherently boring subject matters. There are, however, potentially boring presenters. And we don't want to be one of those. So this one is going to be about how we can make sure no matter what our subject matter, we can bring it to life. And a little bit like being sexy in the real world is less about how we look on the outside and much more about our composure and our confidence and how we conduct ourselves. So it is with our subject matter. Our subject matter may not be a fabulous, sexy marketing campaign. We may not be talking about the meaning of life. But if there is importance in what we are offering and relevance in what we are offering, then there is an intrinsic and inherent interest and engagement for the audience. And that's what we're going to explore in this video. So there are three different areas that I'd like to cover off. Let's start by talking about this idea of boring presentations or boring subject matter and the different types of subject matter. I want to explore the one secret word that is going to make a difference to all our presentations, to make them all fascinating and interesting and engaging for any audience. What's the secret word? And then we're going to finally move on to the idea of stories and anecdotal evidence and how they support our content to make it far more interesting and bring it to life. So let's start off with this idea that we've already started to talk about, which is there such a thing as a boring presentation? And I want to start with a story or an example, which is that of a gentleman who I used to work with. He was in a professional services firm, originally accounting firm, big global organization these days. And he used to employ me every year because he would come up, he was head of tax and legal services for this professional services firm, and every year they would conduct for all their clients a 5-day tax conference. Not yours and my idea maybe of a party, but their idea of a party. So 5 days of tax and legal content. And he would employ me because he'd in fact been voted as the top tax and legal consultant in Australia 3 years in a row. So he was regularly asked to be a keynote presenter at those conferences. And so he would ask me in each year to help work on his presentation. And I remember very distinctly one year when his topic for the year was Part 4A of the tax legislation. And I need to understand the topic if I'm going to help him massage his message and get clear about the focus and the content and how we're going to bring it to life. I've got to understand a bit about the content. So I asked him and I said, look, explain Part 4A to me. What is this all about? Why are you talking about it? And this gentleman doesn't make a lot of eye contact naturally, and we can discuss that later about the issue of being natural in your delivery style. His natural style is not one with a lot of eye contact. And he would look down, and yet he made this topic fascinating, not even particularly because of his delivery, but because of his belief in it, which we talked about in the last video, but also because of the stories he told within it. And so what he would do is he would kind of be looking down and he would use my name from time to time, which is interesting. And he would go, Carolyn, what you need to understand about Part 4A of the tax legislation is that if you imagine your BHP Billiton, one of our big mining organisations here in Australia, And the tax department comes in and they raid your office and they take all your papers and they take away your computers and you're left there and all you've got left and he would tell this whole story and he would tell me real life examples of where this had happened. And it was riveting. It was absolutely riveting. This is part 4A of the tax legislation. Now, I will make a proviso here because I've told that story before and someone in a workshop did tell me that out of all the parts of the tax legislation, it is in fact among the more interesting. But what I like about the way he did it was his use of my name, putting me in the story. Imagine that you are BHP Billiton and this is happening to you. And by use of some very practical techniques that he'd obviously learnt along the way as ways of making his quite difficult and technical subject matter and making it interesting and understandable to an audience, he'd understood that there are ways that you can make that tough topic far more entertaining and engaging for the listener and understandable in the process. Equally, I have seen people with motivational subjects talking about their life story, which has been a dramatic life story, really powerful life story, and yet they've put us to sleep because it was full of cliches. It was just their story. They didn't make it relevant to us in terms of what are the learnings we can take from this? What can we do about it? How can we use their learning in our lives? None of that was in there. And then they seemed kind of almost bored with their own subject because they told the story once too often, I think. And so I think we all have examples of seemingly dry subject matter that's being brought to life, and equally what could and should be really interesting subject matter be made extremely boring. So again, I set that up as a premise so that we inherently understand that there is no boring subject matter, and anything, and I promise you, anything can be brought to life. I don't want you to feel like I'm the only person in the world with the world's most boring subject matter and this applies to everyone but me. This applies to you. You can find ways to make even your subject matter interesting and engaging. So let's move on. Let's talk about what's the one word that you can include in your presentations that is going to make any subject interesting and engaging for the audience. And I throw this question in a workshop to the group, and I'll often ask people, well, what do you think is the one big word that's going to make a difference to the engagement and the interest of the audience? And of course, I'll get all sorts of interesting responses like free or profit or money or sex or all sorts of kind of words that get thrown into the ring. But often sooner or later in the discussion, the word comes up and people nail it, and you may have already understood what it is. The word is you. The more we're able to make this relevant and interesting for you, the listener, the audience, or we as a team, you or we, the more inherently interesting they will find your subject matter and what you're talking about. Because what are they thinking about whilst they're listening to you? They're not really thinking about you personally, caring about you personally. They're not inherently interested in this subject matter. If we want just kind of documentary style data for the sake of documentary style data, we'll watch David Attenborough talking about the mating habits of jellyfish. That's fine. But in fact, when it comes to a business presentation, we want a point for us. What does this mean for me? What am I thinking about as I'm listening to you? I'm thinking about me. I'm thinking about what difference does this make to my life? What am I meant to do about this? Is this a whole new piece of workload? Is this going to make my life difficult? Is it going to make my life easier? If it's a compliance issue, it's all these new steps, all this extra paperwork. Is there any benefit in it for me? Is there a way that if we're talking about a marketing campaign, what difference is it going to make to the bottom line? If I'm selling something, what difference is it going to make to me or my business or my lifestyle or my well-being or my happiness or my contentment or my peace of mind? I want to understand what I need to do about it, how quick and easy it can be for me. I met with a friend recently for coffee who was visiting from Sydney, and he showed me, I'd always wondered about geocaching. He not only said, this is where it is on my phone and this is how you can find it and this is how it works. He physically took me around to where he'd found a geocache the day before in the city of Melbourne, walking distance from where we were having coffee. So he really physically put me in the picture. Now, we can't always get people, you can't always demonstrate your product. Sometimes you can, but you can often kind of put people in the picture with, imagine that you are in a situation where, imagine that you need, or you are lacking confidence in this area of your life and you want to feel like that's a fear that you no longer have. Imagine how free you would feel without that fear. So the more we're making reference to the other party, to the people in the room, to the individual. It may just be one-on-one, it may only be a small group. This isn't just relevant for big, large-scale presentations. But the more we can use the word you, what this means for you is, the difference it makes for you is, what you need to look out for is, the way you may want to implement this is, what you'll need to look out for is, all those yous, the more focused you will be, the more confident you will be, because you know you're offering something that's genuinely useful. So it makes a difference to your confidence, but equally, it's making a difference to them and they are engaged with the material. If I know what part 4A means to me, then I'm intrinsically interested in what I need to do about it. Okay. So we're going to include the you word. You need to consciously, when you're planning, go through, as I'm talking to you, think about a presentation you've got coming up. And I want you to be taking notes on, how can I refer to the audience during my presentation? Where can I include you-centered sentences? Take some notes as we go. Let's move on to just the third part of this discussion, which is how else we can make our content interesting. We know the one word that makes a difference to our focus, but also the audience's takeaway, is the word you. But then there's some other tools and techniques we can bring into play that come under the broad heading of what I call anecdotal evidence. So we've heard in the law shows that we've seen on TV, empirical evidence and anecdotal evidence. And in a presentation world, what that means is empirical evidence is our facts and our figures and our statistics and our data and our methodology and our process and our flowchart and our graphs and so forth. Anecdotal evidence is where we include stories and examples and hypotheticals. And so let's just explore those for a moment. Stories, and what I want to say about this is you need to consciously include these things. So when you are planning, consciously plan a story you're going to include, an example you're going to include, and you can even include a prompter up on your visual aid, up on your slide, up on your screen, if you're using something like that, or simply in your notes. You can have a little note, e.g., and remind yourself, just one word to remind yourself what the example is. So stories, there are stories, we're surrounded by stories. If I want to tell you the story of, that was convenient, that wasn't actually deliberately placed there to tell this story. But if I want to tell you the story of this book, which is the story, the book that I wrote with an illustrator, fully illustrated book, fully illustrated book about the art of presenting, and I want to talk about the idea of how this is relevant to you and your world. So maybe what I say is, I'm using this as an example, and I say to you, there's a process for telling stories, and the process is incident, point, benefit. IPB, incident, point, benefit. So incident is, let me tell you the story of what happened. I met this illustrator 4 years ago and we got on really well, and we came up with the idea of a fully illustrated how-to guide, moulding our two worlds, his illustrations, my presentation skills, content. Then I make a point, to a generic point, which is the world is filled with creative ideas and possibilities, and when we pluck two seemingly disparate skills or disparate ideas, we can mould them together and we can come up with a new combination that's never been explored before. And equally, now we go into the B, the benefit. What does this mean for you, or the relevance for you? You can think of it as relevance rather than benefit. So therefore the point for you is within your presentations, you can find creative ideas and content all around you by physically using a pen and coming up with an idea out of the pen and the apple, and being able to combine the two of them into the idea of writing a health plan. Yes? So you may be speaking about health in some way, shape or form. By taking random objects, we can often combine them to come up with a creative possibility or a creative analogy or a different way of bringing something to life. So if you can see, what I've done there is I've told a story of the book, I've made a point, so the incident, then we've gone on to the point, P for point. The generic point is creativity is all around us, and any physical individual item or combination of items can trigger a possibility. That was the generic point. And then I went into something that was more specific and relevant to our discussion here, which is, and that might prompt you with a creative idea for your presentation. Use the items around you to come up with a creative idea for your presentation that makes it interesting and makes it relevant. Other things we can use by way of anecdotal evidence, so we've said stories following the IPB process. We can also use things like examples, of course, and sometimes in those examples we can use people's names. I had someone in my webinar series recently was making a presentation about her some essential oils that she was involved in, and she managed to go through the 5 people in our group. It was 6 people in our group, very niche little group, our gold class group, and she was able to say, because she knew us all quite well by then, it was about 6 weeks into the webinar series, so we all knew each other quite well. She was able to specifically identify, Carolyn, this particular essential oil would be terrific for you if you were able to, if you imagine having it by you whilst you're running this webinar. It will stimulate you and it will have your brain firing and excited and energized. Whereas equally, I've heard you talking about putting your son to sleep, and the lavender would be really helpful. A couple of drops on his pillowcase might be lovely. So using names and using individuals in the audience, I've seen that done as, imagine this side of the room, you're the sales department, and this side of the room, you're the marketing department. Currently what our communication looks like is this. Marketing, you're coming to sales with a fait accompli in terms of a campaign you've created and asking sales to go forth and now sell that campaign into the marketplace and that discount and that special. So I've seen it done like that. So using people's names either individually or collectively and having us imagine ourselves in a situation is a lovely tool for bringing your boring presentation to life. So we call those hypotheticals. Imagine you are your customer and right at the moment, here's your need. This is what your life looks like. Imagine that you're able to fulfill that need with a solution along these lines, yes? So imagine that you're the CEO of this company and you receive a report that is 55 pages long. Wouldn't you rather have it on a page or two, considering what the rest of your life looks like and how busy it is and how many piles of paper you have on your desk? So Imagine is a powerful, powerful tool for bringing tough content to life. Examples of real life customers who have used this product before, or best practice in the industry and how this system has been implemented elsewhere. Again, a powerful tool, those examples, real life examples of where this has been used before. Equally, just simple things like personal expression is a form of anecdotal evidence where you say, what I'm really excited about here or what I'm a little concerned about. So where you offer a little bit of personal expression can be a lovely piece of anecdotal evidence that brings it to life. Audience involvement. Has anyone here had a bad customer experience recently? Yeah, customer service experience. So audience involvement, a show of hands, or can you tell me about that experience that you had? So a little bit of brainstorming or audience involvement. All of those are tools that I would include in the kit bag of anecdotal evidence. So just recapping those, we talked about stories using the IPB formula, examples, hypotheticals, metaphors, people's names, audience involvement, personal expression. Let's go back to the beginning. We've talked about starting from the get-go. We've talked about there are no boring presentations. There's no boring presentation topics. There are only boring presenters, and any topic can be made interesting and engaging for your audience. We talked about the one word that really brings it to life, and that's the word you. The more relevant you can make it for your audience, the more meaningful you can make it for your audience, the more engaging and interesting they'll find it. And finally, we've been through a list of anecdotal tools to substantiate and to verify and to prove your content, but to make it real and to bring it to life. And that's where the rubber really hits the road and makes it exciting and helps us to really understand the context and the way in which we can use this. So, a little bit like the real world, the idea of being sexy is all about, in fact, the other person. And the more we go about making it varied and interesting and satisfying and interesting and relevant and meaningful for them, the more interesting and engaging and sexy, if you like, your topic and you will be. So I'm looking forward to seeing you in our third video. In our third video, we're going to get onto the idea of, particularly if you're in a startup, and I'm seeing more and more and more of this at the moment, you want to start a new business, or you've got a business and you want to really step it up to the next level and take it out to the market. You're finding your niche, you're finding the angle. What's the topic I should really be speaking on in terms of the presentation? And what's really the kind of the angle I need to take on it, and how do I know where that market is and what I should be really talking about to make it, again, a little bit to do with engaging, but how do I know what the point and the differentiation is? So let's get into that material in our next video. A pleasure being with you. I'll look forward to seeing you then. All the best for now.